Everyone knows to become the best chess player you can be, you need to learn from your mistakes. The easiest way to do that, whether you play online chess or in person over the board, is to review your games. We know to look for where we blundered in our game reviews and confer with the engine to see which the best move was, but that feels incredibly shallow. The truth is, we all watched our 10-minute opening lessons by Gotham Chess when we started playing chess. Maybe we watched some videos on the endgame as well, but we were never taught how to properly analyze our games. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through absolutely everything you need to review your own chess games regardless of your skill level. So, let's get started. Well, a good place to start is where do we actually review our games? The most popular option is chess.com's game review, but literally any kind of game analysis feature will work the same. And for the purpose of this video, it doesn't really matter which one you decide to use. You can use the chess.com game review, the Lichess analysis board, or this free game review function made by Wintercat. The link will be in the description below. Let's begin by looking at how we can put our game into any game review feature. It's very straightforward if you want to review your game on the same website that you played it on. You quite literally just click game review or analyze game. But if you want to cross over an over the board game to chess.com, you're going to need to do some conversion. For any over the board game that you've played, you'll need to go to the analysis board. Here, you'll set the position to the default starting position whilst making sure you're not in the board editor mode. From there, all you need to do is to put the moves that you played in your game on the board. Once you're done, hit review and your game should be completely analyzed by the engine. If you're wanting to transfer a Lichess game to chess.com's game review or vice versa, find the game you want to review and click the share button. Now copy the PGN, which can be found in the game's description, and go to the game review function you wish to use. Paste it in the load from PGN section and then hit review, and your game will now be in the engine. To showcase how to review a game and the things that you should be looking out for, we'll use one of my games as an example. Let's use this game where I lost to a 2,300 rated player from the UK. When we review our games, the most important thing to remember is that it's not an excuse to give ourselves a pat on the back for what we did right, but to find out what we did wrong. Of course, there will be crucial moments where it's important to develop a deeper understanding of what we did right. But identifying what we did wrong and what we should have done instead is what makes a great chess player. So let's begin from the start. In this game, my opponent plays e4, and I reply with c5, the Sicilian defense. Immediately, my opponent is trying to take me down an uncommon line, playing a3 and entering the Mangiarini variation. It's a super unique variation, and even as early as move 2, we can learn something from this game review. I follow up with the move knight c3, but after b4, we have a huge decision to make. If we play c takes b4, white will play a takes b4. If we recapture with the knight, white will play c3, and after knight c6, they will take the entire center with d4. The engine tells us that the position is even, but especially out of the opening when you're actually given a choice, as in which opening lines you prefer to go down depending on your playstyle, you should consider if this is a position you actually want to play, or if you should choose another option. It's important to note that just because the engine says one thing is good, doesn't mean it'll be the most suitable thing for you. At the end of the day, we are humans, and our own opinions matter when reviewing games, as we're the one that actually needs to play these positions. So let's look at our other options, because if we don't take the pawn, our pawn is under attack. e5 is another option, but after b5, knight d4, c3, and knight e6, we get to a position where we have an awkward knight on e6. This position is not bad by any means, and feels a lot better than the previous position, but it's still not a position that I would be thrilled about playing with. This is actually what happened in the game, but let's go and explore some of our options even earlier to see if we can find something more enjoyable to play against the Mangiarini variation. So after a3, we can identify that our knight on c6 actually becomes a bit of a target to black's queenside pawns. But the move a3 is so slow anyway. Why don't we play a different move entirely? After a3, the engine thinks that there are several other moves that we can play that give the same evaluation. Let's try g6. Now, if black plays b4, we play bishop g7, attacking the rook in the corner. This forces knight c3, and now we even have a move like knight f6. If b takes c5, we have knight takes e4, brilliant, because the knight on f3 is pinned to the rook. If e5, knight h5, and the pawn is hanging in the center of the board. Even if they don't play b4 here, and let's say they play d4, we can play c takes d4, and after queen takes d4, this position is quite pleasant after knight f6, because e5 would be met with knight c6. If instead of d4, knight f3 is played, we have bishop g7, and in my opinion, I've found a response to the Mangiarini variation that I'm much more comfortable playing, and the engine also thinks my position is just as good as the line that was actually played in the game. This is incredibly important to understand. Just because the engine thinks two moves are just as good as each other doesn't mean they are no different. The engine has no way of telling you which move is going to result in an easier game plan because it knows so much and assumes you do too. So it's up to you to use the engine's advice and make the decision for yourself. Which line do you find the most enjoyable to play? If you're stuck on memorizing things like this, take a look at chessbook.com, which might help you out in keeping track of your preferred lines. Not a sponsored shout out or anything, I just use it myself and think it's extremely useful. So let's continue on with the game. After knight c6, b4, e5, b5, knight d4, c3, and knight e6, white plays bishop c4. Now I know technically we're not out of the opening yet, but for all purposes of this video, let's imagine this position isn't theoretical. The reason we need to do this is because there is a difference between reviewing the opening phase and the middle game. When we review the opening, we learn things that we can just memorize. Of course, it's good to have a complete understanding of why we make opening moves, but the difference is when we get to a middle game, the likelihood is we've never reached this exact position before, and we're not memorizing opening lines, but we're understanding patterns. For us, this is the case because we've established in an ideal world, if somebody plays the Mangiarini variation against us again, we won't reach this position because we've decided that on move 2, it's more comfortable for us to play g6 instead of knight c6. Because of this decision we've made, we have no reason to memorize these opening lines. Likewise, this methodology of reviewing games can be applied in late endgames. Let's say, for example, we reach an endgame where we are down 2 queens and down -9 on evaluation. There is very little reason for us to be analyzing such a desperately lost position. Instead, we should try to avoid getting into those positions to begin with by analyzing an earlier position in the game and identifying where it went wrong to begin with. So let's continue with bishop c4 and the following move d6. The intention is clear. We reinforce our central pawn structure whilst defending the knight with the bishop. This means if white chooses to capture our knight, we recapture with the bishop as opposed to doubling our pawns. In the eyes of the engine, this was a subpar move. The reason is because it's too slow. The engine believes that doubled pawns in exchange for the bishop pair is a positive trade for black, and that we should attempt to develop pieces faster with knight f6, knight e7, or even knight f4. However, in saying this, the move d6 was logical and by no means was a blunder, nor gives white a significant advantage. Now we won't go through this entire game, but you might be wondering, how do I know all of this? Well, for some things, for example, exploring the possibility of doubled pawns, you can just put it on the board and see what the engine thinks. If knight f6, bishop takes e6, and f takes e6, we can see the engine gives an evaluation of -0.5 for black. But practically speaking, why is this position good for us? Well, in any position, we need to look at the strengths and weaknesses for both sides. First, let's look at the black position. Black has a nicely opened f-file which can be occupied by a rook once the king is castled short. Black only has one piece between the king and castling rights. Black has unopposable central control with its pawns. Black has a slight lead on development as white traded off their most active piece. Black also has the bishop pair. However, Black's light squared bishop has limited options for development. Likewise, Black's dark squared bishop also has limited options for development. Black has doubled pawns, and it's also not Black's turn to move. Now, let's look at White's position. It is White's turn to move. White only has one piece between the king and castling rights, and natural development with knight f3 comes with tempo on the loose pawn. However, White has an overextended b-pawn. White does not have the bishop pair. White's e-pawn is currently under attack, the placement of White's c-pawn is awkward, White's b1 knight cannot develop anywhere, and White has minimal central control. Whilst there is no easy calculation for how these strengths and weaknesses weigh into the engine evaluation given for this position, you can see that the side with more strengths has a better evaluation, whilst the side with more weaknesses has a worse one. With a new and improved understanding of the position, it's a lot easier for us to identify why the engine likes and dislikes certain moves. For example, let's say white plays a subpar move in this position, knight f3. Why is that a bad move? Because it ignores a threat on the e-pawn, and black can just capture it on the next move. We first identified that a weakness in white's position was the e-pawn being under attack, and because white did not address it, we took immediate advantage of it. But let's imagine after d3 and b6, white makes another inaccuracy that doesn't straight up hang a pawn. Let's look at how our understanding of the positional dynamics helps us figure out why it was a bad move. Let's imagine white plays bishop b2, developing the bishop and anticipating the opening of the a1 to h8 diagonal. Even though this is not a blunder, it's a subpar move because it allows black to play this tricky move c4. While c4 might be a little bit of an advanced move, we can use our previous assessment of the position to identify why it would be beneficial for black. Firstly, c4 threatens to capture the weak e4 pawn we identified before, should d take c4 or d4 be played in response. We are essentially removing the defender of the central e4 pawn by playing c4. Even if white ignores our pawn sacrifice, which by the way they should, we have opened up the c4 square for our dark squared bishop, which we previously described as a piece with limited developmental options. Our light squared bishop benefits from this too. If white's light squared pawn chain in the center of the board loses its integrity, the move bishop b7 seems extremely ideal. The move c5 also makes it very difficult for white to retain their overextended b5 pawn should they not capture on c5. We also identified the b5 pawn as a weakness for white earlier. Lastly, whilst we didn't quite identify this before, white's dark squared bishop is now boxed in regardless of what they do. If they capture our pawn, there are now two separate pawns blocking in that bishop, and if they leave the pawn, the bishop will never see the open diagonal. This all may seem complicated, but the trick to analyzing positions and understanding engine moves all revolves around your ability to identify strengths and weaknesses in the position for both sides. When you perfect that skill, analyzing your own games and understanding why the engine evaluates moves differently than others will become so much more clear to you. This process can and should be used all the way from the start of the opening to the end of your games when analyzing. So let's move on to exactly how this method works in real time. To properly showcase the methodology of reviewing games in this fashion, I'm going to play a game and solely review it based on what I've told you guys already. Of course, it's easy for me to read the explanation of a position based on a script I've written in advance, but what about a position that I've just played? For this, we're going to play a game of 5-minute blitz on chess.com. I'm going to explain my moves and thoughts whilst I play the game, and then we're going to review it. This way, you'll be able to walk through and identify the same key moments I do whilst I play. Of course, my analysis of the game will not be perfect, but you'll get to see the general idea of how I would do it for my own games and how it can help you improve as a player. So let's get into the game. This is the first game that we're going to be playing. Hopefully we'll just use the first example. So let's start off with d4. And my opponent immediately is going for the Caro-Kann. I have been studying my openings as white very recently, but I'm just going to go with the basic bishop f4 here. And I'm going to go with e3. My opponent could play queen b6, which is a common idea in the Caro-Kann, trying to immediately take advantage of this b2 pawn here. But I think I'm just going to go with knight d2 now. We're holding the e4 square, whilst also meeting queen b6 with rook b1 now. If the bishop is to come out, in this case we would block on f3. If they came out to f5, we would probably play bishop d3, but let's just block here with development, and we can finish our development now. Well, not quite. We finish our development on castling, but all of our pieces are out now, and we've got an active rook. I could play c4 here. Rook e1 is also tempting. There is also just the very standard h3, which I quite like. I like h3. It gives my bishop some room to go back, and it also harasses the bishop with temper. Rook e1 now is just on my mind, and I think I'm going to speed up a little bit because my opponent is playing much quicker. He castles. c4 is certainly something I'm thinking about. Rook a c1. But I like just the move c3. The reason I like c3 is because I want to immediately play e4, because I don't think my opponent is going to play c5. We can just play rook b1 now, like we said we would. If he tries to go for this pawn, I'm just going to play a3, and my opponent does play c4 now. And I think I'm just going to play a3 and drop my bishop back now. This pin cannot be blocked by my bishop anymore, which is a shame, but I really want to go for this e4 move. My opponent can't play b5 because their queen is in the way, which generally would be the next move in this position when you play c4. So I really wouldn't have played c4 so early. I would have rerouted the queen maybe back to d8 and then played c4, because now I just have the very clear plan of just going and playing e4 and breaking open this rook in the center of the board. At any point, I could consider g4 also, but I think it's a bit too much of a commitment right now. My opponent could also play something like d6. I would take and then play e4. But if he's just going to allow us to play e4, I'm just going to play it. Takes. I don't take with the bishop because I want to keep this bishop on a strong diagonal. I want to take with the knight and then take with the bishop. He could route back around to g6. I'm not sure if I would take in that position. He's going to take, so we can take here. This pawn is also a little bit weak now, which is interesting. And he attacks my bishop, and I think I'm just gonna drop my bishop back somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where. I think it's probably best to go to h2. And I've kind of caught up on time. My opponent has spent a couple moves thinking pretty hard, and just trying to figure out where my next move should be. Knight d2 is not a bad move, just attacking this pawn. If I take, he's probably going to reroute his knight back. I don't really want that. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go knight d2. We're attacking this pawn now. We're also able to take back with our knight. Queen e2 is an idea, connecting the rooks. Maybe there's a bishop e5, just activating our bishop a lot more. He's defending like that, so let's just add some more pressure on this pawn. We could now jump our knight in with a move like bishop e5. I think we're going to go for bishop e5 and knight e4. This way I can kind of get rid of both pieces, and I'm going for this bishop e4 move because I see that it's on the same diagonal. I'm going to go back really quickly. Okay, and he's locked up this structure, which I think is just a mistake from him. I'm not exactly sure how I want to do this. So I'm going to go here and maybe flirt with the idea of knight g3. Just kicking this bishop away. I mean, he can take at any point. Okay, and he pins the bishop. It's not really a pin. So I'm going to go knight e5. And now we're forking the knight and the queen. I can take. I've got a strong knight, a strong bishop in the center of the board. He moves that back. But now I can't go here because of takes. Takes and takes. I could bring my knight in there, but I'm not sure if there's a massive reason to do that. I don't really love the idea of getting this bishop traded off. Maybe I want to go for like some h4 stuff. It's all a little bit difficult. Knight c5. Just none of these moves feel amazing is my problem right now. I'm going to put the ball in his court. I think he's going to go for bishop c7, trying to trade off some things. But now maybe I can go for this h5 idea. h5, queen in. h4, h5. I like h4, h5. I also need to speed up a little bit. I spent a little bit too much time on that bishop g3 move. We're going to push. And I'm going to drop back, just defending this pawn once more. I'm anticipating this move. And now maybe we can focus on a move like rook e5. Yeah, so this doesn't actually do anything. I think he's just going for this square. Let's go rook e5. If he goes here, I've got a free pawn. I can't go rook c5, annoyingly. We'll take. I could even try to trade that off. Although it does look... Okay, I could go takes. Let's take here. Taking another pawn. We've got 19 seconds, which is a big problem. I want to go knight e4 and knight c5. He's just going to take. But I'm up 2 pawns right now. He should take like... no, he can't take like that. He has to take like this. And I feel good about my position now. He can take. Let's go here, and I'm going to trade off the queens. And that's checkmate. Wow. Very tense game there, but a lot of things to take away. And no cuts. We're not going to review the game after I've looked at it. We're going to immediately look at the game and see what I could have done better. Of course, the obvious thing that I could have done better was my time management. I'm also going to get rid of... Actually, I should show you guys the engine, actually. That would be a great idea. I won't cut it. I might... Actually, no, the engine is shown. Perfect. So we play d4 and c6. I can't exactly remember what I was thinking about playing. I think I've been flirting with these knight c3 ideas with my theory, to play against the Caro-Kann. I just feel like bringing the bishop out against the Caro-Kann is very, very tame. It doesn't really threaten anything. So I've been looking at these ideas of bringing, even knight d2 in some scenarios. I don't really like playing into Caro-Kann theory at all. But regardless, let's review the game that we have, not the game that we could have had. Bishop f4 and d5. So yeah, bishop f4, of course, not the best move, but I've been studying this. Bishop f4, d5, and we play e3, which is obviously going to be the top engine move. This is just the London system, basically. They're going to play e6, maybe. They're going to bring their bishop out. They play knight f6, which is a very common move. I mean, there's not too many moves black can play here. c4, which was an idea that we kind of toyed with, is going to be the top engine move. I don't really love playing c4, especially against the Caro-Kann. I don't know why. It's kind of just a preference. I like to develop all of my pieces first and then kind of look at ideas like c4. I think we considered c4 a little bit further down the line. But we played knight bd2 here. The idea is, if we play something like bishop d3, I don't love knight e4. I know in this position it is winning, but I don't like giving up the bishop pair like this. The reason that you can is because the pawn is extremely weak. But in a general sense, I don't. I would rather play knight here, 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 and here. I would much prefer to get this position rather than giving up my bishop pair. However, maybe I could have just brought up my bishop. Apparently both moves are equally kind of rated by the engine. They both kind of give the same evaluation. Knight d2 is plus 0.2, whereas bishop d3 is plus 0.2. So they're both very similar moves, so the engine doesn't really have a massive preference between the two. It just thinks that c4 is much better than both of them. But we'll go knight bd2 here. And after bishop g4, knight gf3 is going to be the top engine move, developing whilst blocking the attack on our queen. So e6 is played, just a very standard move. I was toying with this h3 move, which we ended up playing a little bit later, not exactly now, but it is the top engine move right now. But I played bishop d3, just developing another piece. The best move is h3, but why is it so much better? Okay, so g4. We actually toyed with this idea a little bit later, but getting the bishop onto g6 and now playing knight e5 is just very, very good because the bishop is going to be traded off and we're getting the bishop pair. Not only are we getting the bishop pair, we've expanded the potential that our bishop can develop to. It can now go to g2, which is actually a very common idea in the London system. So that's why h3 was a lot better. And of course, if they just take, we're going to take with the queen, with the knight, both of them are very good. And we've won the bishop pair. So h3 is the reason that bishop d3 is not so good. So we've immediately identified that h3 would have won the bishop pair. So bishop d3 may be a little bit too slow and not capitalizing on that opportunity that black gave us. So black now continues with knight b d7, which immediately I don't think is a good move because it stops the potential of you ever playing bishop d6. For example, here in I castle, you can't play this anymore because nothing's defending it. So immediately I see that as kind of a weird move. Not a bad move by any sense, but a weird move for sure. A better move in this position would have been c5, which is a very difficult move to play if you're a Caro-Kann player because you've already wasted the move playing c6. But they play knight b d7, and I just castle. I think castling is a decent move here. Again, the engine likes h3. We won't go on and look at why h3 is a good move. I also don't like playing c3 here too much, or too early, I should say, because I like keeping my options open. Sometimes you play c3, and at the end of the day, you're going to need to play c4 anyway, like what the engine suggests in this position, where they already played c6, and they might need to play c5 later. I like to keep my pawn on c2, just so I have the option of doing both, so I'm not wasting moves in the opening. But they play knight b d7, and I castle. Of course, h3 was the better move there, but we've already looked at that. And they play bishop e7, and now we play h3, which I thought was a good move. It kind of gives the bishop a little bit of space to go back to. It's a move with temper on the bishop. If they go bishop h5, g4 is not so good now because after bishop g6, we've got a bishop here on d3, and we can't play the move knight e5 trapping the bishop because they'll just trade off the bishops. So whilst h3 is a good move, the follow-up of g4 is not a good move anymore. So we go rook e1, which is just one of the best moves. Again, c4 is one of the better moves here. The engine also likes c3, but again, I've explained why I don't love playing that. It also thinks a4 is a good move. A4, okay, what if they castle? A4, a5, it just wants you to expand on the queen side and take space. The reason that the engine likes this is because once you've taken the space, black can't. So in any endgame, this is going to be good. This is very, very... I don't want to say it's deep, but it's extremely... The reason that this is good will matter a lot later in the game rather than in a couple of moves. So the move a5 is just, there's no immediate threats on my position, but this will be helpful later on. So we play rook e1, which the engine also thinks is fine. Castling is the best move for black. And now I play the move c3, which the engine doesn't mind. It doesn't really love c4 anymore. I couldn't tell you exactly why. c4, the engine thinks c5 now, and black can kind of say, anything you can do, I can do better, and kind of equalizes with this c5 move. So that's why c4 isn't as good anymore. c3 really just threatens to play e4 and try to get this rook open, which was the idea. They play queen b6. Queen b3 was the top engine move here, but I don't really just want to trade my queens. Even if I do get the open file, which the engine really loves, you can see that the evaluation is only 0.3, and I feel like trading off the queens for such a small evaluation is a big risk in any kind of game. So I go rook b1, which the engine doesn't love. It also thinks that you can play... It actually thinks that you can just sacrifice the pawn, which is kind of funny. So say a5 and the pawn is taken, you can go rook b1, and it's a poison pawn. So it thinks you don't actually need to guard it, so maybe that's a little bit of an oversight by me, but at this point I'm down a minute on the clock as well. So I play rook b1, they play c5, which I thought might be coming at some stage, and now I play a3. a3 was just a move to get to be able to think on their clock because I was down so much time. They play c4, which I thought was a mistake because that queen is on b6. For example, if they played this, and let's give them another move, for example, if they can play c4 and then follow up with b5, I feel like this is very good for black. But considering their queen was in the way of that b5 push, I feel like this is a lot more manageable for white. They play a4, I play e4, we're taking in the center. Knight d5 is a good move to give pressure on my bishop. I don't like bishop g3, because in a lot of cases, a knight can end up on h5, a knight can end up on f5 and kind of harass this bishop. The only reason that you would play bishop g3 as opposed to bishop h2 is to stop a piece from occupying this loft for your king. But in this situation, I don't think there's going to be back rank problems anytime soon, so bishop h2 is a completely suitable move in my opinion. The knight now goes to f6, and I was kind of refraining from trading off too many pieces. I also just didn't love this pin on my queen, which is the reason that I kind of avoided trading off a piece that could defend this knight. Of course, we can maybe go rook e3, but then a move like knight d5 comes, and I wasn't a massive fan of this either. This did not happen, though. Instead, we played knight e d2, which is the best move in the position, attacking this pawn. They play queen c6, and now g4 is a good move. g4, bishop g6, bishop takes, pawn takes, and we're a knight e5. And now we're getting tempo, development with tempo, and we're actually forking the pawn and the queen in this situation. The reason that we couldn't do this before was because bishop takes d1, right? Okay, that's very obvious. Very embarrassing that I didn't see that immediately. But g4 in that position was a little bit of an oversight. Would have just immediately won the game, to be honest. I play queen e2 instead. They play b5, clamping down and defending this pawn. I then go bishop e5. I was a little bit stuck for a plan here. I wasn't really sure how I wanted to go forward, so I just played bishop e5, trying to make something weird happen on the board. My opponent played knight d7. I just brought the bishop back. And then they played a4, which I thought was a big mistake. And the reason I thought it was a mistake is because all of my pieces clearly want to play on this side of the board. You can see all of my pieces are aiming, apart from this bishop, which is aiming to the other side of the board. I clearly want to play on this side of the board, right? So if he's closing off the pawns on this side of the board and letting me play on this side of the board, I'm going to welcome that. And that's why the engine thinks that this is almost plus 0.1 on evaluation, despite there being no difference in material. So I play knight e4 immediately and miss. Apparently knight e5 was better. You should give up your bishop because you're threatening to take with check also. I think that knight e4 is a perfectly sensible plan to make. Bishop g6 is a very good move. Attempting to trade off these bishops, I play knight e5. Trading off these knights in the center and again activating my bishop. He goes bishop d8. He didn't want to go bishop d6 because, of course, once he takes... once I take, there is really... you're just blundering a piece. So he wants to go back here where my knight can't reach. So he goes bishop d8, and I go bishop g3. In reality, I was kind of wasting a little bit of time here. I went down a minute on the clock again, and I wasn't really sure what to do. I play h4 here. h4, the move h6 is great. The engine really likes knight f4, trying to dive in. I thought h6 was a great move, and after h5, knight f4 is a great move again, something I missed there. Which my opponent completely overlooked. This just forks my queen and the pawn. But I play h5, and my opponent goes back to h7. I then go knight g3, and I'm like, okay, I've got an advanced pawn here. My knight's well placed. I can lift my rooks, I'm feeling okay about this position. My opponent plays knight f4, immediately threatening to go into this outpost here. I was almost considering going something like rook e3, which is the second top engine move, and after knight d3, there's obviously the potential to sacrifice the exchange. I wasn't really wanting to do this at all. Instead, I played knight e5. The idea is if you immediately jump in, I'm going to take this pawn here. Although the engine still thinks that I'm worse here. In this position, the engine thinks I'm negative 1.7 because of the move. Queen c6, attacking the rook here. And is my rook trapped? My rook is trapped, and I have to sacrifice the exchange. Okay, I was a little bit worried about this. Because I knew that a nice idea would have been the move rook c5, which would fork the queen and this pawn, and the pawn would be undefendable, but the knight just holds all of the important squares, and these pawns hold very important squares too, so queen c6, my rook is actually trapped there, which is maybe something I should have considered, but because I am lower in time, it's a mistake that maybe you can pass off and say, okay, that's not the worst mistake in the world, I was low on time. Maybe if I had more time, I would have seen something or considered that. So I play rook takes. My opponent misses the move, though. It allows me to trade off the rook. The engine thinks I'm better now after the trade. Of course, I have more material. I have the extra pawn, but my opponent has 2 extra minutes. I take on a4, which is the best move. Really, the only thing you can do. My opponent plays queen f4. I play queen c2, the only move defending this. I mean, you could also play this, but then, rook takes b2, and then you've got too many threats on this f2 pawn. So I go queen c2. My opponent goes rook b3, best move. Not sure why, but we're not analyzing for my opponent here. We're analyzing for us. A4 is the best move. Actually, just trying to get this pass pawn going. but I play queen e2. I want to get this knight into the game and try to trade off some pieces. Queen b8, I go knight e4. I would have thought that something like rook takes is good here. Rook takes, knight takes. But then I guess something like, what is it? Knight c5, and you're just going to get this pawn on a4. You're threatening to take on c4, and this just feels very, very comfortable for white. So they shouldn't take for that reason. They should keep pieces on the board. King h7 was a mistake because of knight c5, and we're trading off, of course. Can you take it? Takes. Knight takes. But then we get to the same position with a4, and we're just accelerating it by one move. Of course, you can't take here because the rook is hanging also. So they take, queen c7, they allow me to take. And at this point, I think it's even 5 moves ago, the analysis of this game was kind of irrelevant because I think it was very obvious that my opponent was just trying to flag me. I play rook d1, blundering a pawn, he doesn't take it. I check, play b4, and at this stage, I'm trying to bait him into taking this pawn because I think it'll be a lot easier to win whilst I traded off the queens. I've got 3 passed pawns, and the rest of this game really doesn't matter for analysis. I could have easily flagged this game and lost, but I didn't. I ended up winning it, and I feel like that's as good as of an analysis that you're going to get in a 5-minute blitz game. Of course, the longer the game, the better your analysis should be because you've had more time to think about it, but I think for a 5-minute blitz game, this is a more than adequate analysis. And that concludes our video today on how to properly review your chess games. It was certainly one of the most highly requested videos on my community tab, and it's great to have gotten around such an important and underrated skill in the game of chess. If you're still confused about anything related to analyzing games or something that I mentioned in the video, feel free to drop a comment and I'll do my best to reply. Other than that, have a great day, and I will see you all in the next video.